Like I was 100% sure I was going to save the world. Purpose and profit don't necessarily have to be diametrically opposed. But what the cushion of privilege gives you, if people take it, is the fact that you have the headspace and the freedom to think of something bigger than yourself. That, are you happy with the legacy that you're on, or the legacy track that you're on? And for me, that was really a moment to stop and think whether the balance sheet that I have of my friends and my family and my life outside work is really something that I can feel proud of. And to be honest, the answer is.
All right, welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast, and thank you so much for tuning in once again. While we're in Sri Lanka, we thought we'd talk to some of the people who inspire us the most. And we did the episode over in Harvard. Well, today we're doing a bit of a mashup episode because we've got someone from Harvard who's also a native Sri Lankan. So we're really excited to have with us today Sabrina. Sabrina, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So again, Sabrina and I studied last 2 years together. So I know her for last 2 years, and she runs a very large business in Sri Lanka, a family business. I guess your
fourth generation.
Yeah, fourth generation. So we wanted to talk about a bit more about you, and thank you, Sabrina, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So to start this conversation off, I really need to ask you a very fundamental question, and that is, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, success, to be honest, I'm still figuring out what it means to me. But I think there are times when I feel more successful than others, and I think this is kind of informing my view of what success means. And I think success, at least for me, means when you're able to really build something that improves people's lives. Whether you're able to build something or offer a service, offer your time, that you think fundamentally changes how people live, changes people's perspective on things. And yeah, that's for me sort of what I'm starting to internalize what success means. Yeah.
So it's about helping others for you.
It's about sort of seeing the impact that you have in terms of like the products that you make, the time that you give on changing or enabling others. Yeah.
Creating a positive impact for others.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump on quickly and say a massive thank you for all of the support so far. But I also wanted to ask a favor of you guys. We want this podcast to reach as many people as possible so that we can share all of the incredible learnings that we've had so far. But in order for us to do that, we need to grow our following to beat the algorithms. But the good news is, however, there is one simple thing that you can do to help us reach that goal. So I ask you, if you could please follow or subscribe to us on whatever channel you're listening to this on. It'll help us grow the channel, which means we can get on bigger and better guests for you guys. And with that, back to the episode. So just as Jam said, this is a fourth generation business, right? So for those of our listeners who don't know what your business does, can you give a little bit of a brief of what Hemas does?
Sure. So we're a 75-year-old company. My great-grandfather started it in 1948, which is incidentally the year Sri Lanka got its independence.
Oh, right.
He started off in a tiny shop in today what is known as PETA, which is like the wholesale markets in Colombo. We started off as a pharmaceutical distribution business where we were importing pharmaceuticals and then making it available and accessible to Sri Lankan. So that's the oldest part of the business. Since then, we've kind of diversified into a whole bunch of things, as family businesses often do. My dad started the business that I run today, which is the consumer business in the 1980s. But we also had a travel business. We had a logistics. We have a logistics business. We were in hotels. And now I think we've sort of narrowed down the scope of the business into healthcare and consumer. So that's kind of what we do.
Wow, so a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And so what we found is people's journeys are very much shaped by their early years. And so I want to go back to your early life. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your kind of early family life, and how you think it's influenced the woman you've become today.
So I had a pretty spectacular childhood. My great-grandfather bought basically a street in Colombo when it was a cinnamon plantation at the time, but now it's become like a fairly central part of the CBD. And he gifted parts of it, not to his children, but to his grandchildren. And so he was thinking sort of 2 generations ahead. And so as a result, my dad and his cousins inherited homes down this one street. And so I had a childhood where I grew up on the same street as all of my cousins.
Amazing.
I had sort of, if I didn't like the food in my house one evening, I could, pop over to my aunt's. The downside of it was like if you tried to sneak out as a kid, like you had 10 aunts sort of watching you. But I think, as a kid, it was a very wholesome childhood because you were surrounded by family, and family, you really felt what it was like to be in a supported community. We used to have Sunday lunch every week. We still do that.
Family, everyone's together? The grandfathers?
The grandfather and my uncles, yeah. So there was about 25 of us.
Wow.
Every Sunday, and we still meet every Sunday. And so that, for me, family was a big part of my childhood, and a big part of, I think, what informed what was important to me too as years went on. Yeah.
And are there any traits that you think you took from your parents?
A ton. I think so. While we had a great childhood, obviously we were very privileged. We traveled a bunch. I think there were a couple of things that definitely informed the woman that I am today. So one is my parents were always super intentional about making sure that we were exposed to things that were bigger than Sri Lanka, than ourselves. And I think they were super intentional about making sure that we traveled to places that were unfamiliar to us every year. And so this was sort of a ritual where we went to different countries, we learned about their culture, we learned about their food, we met different people. And so this kind of always placed high value on exposure and really understanding and being curious about people and lives that are different to yours. And so that was sort of a big, I think, a foundational part of how we grew up. And secondly, I remember my dad always saying this, like, the 2 things that you should always overinvest on is travel and education. And so travel, of course, I spoke about that, but the second thing was education. It was always something that it was no holds barred. If we wanted to go outside Sri Lanka for education, that was something that was always open to us. And that became a big part of what the family valued. Yeah.
You had any siblings, Sabrina?
Yeah, I have a younger brother and a younger sister. Yeah, so I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest one. Yeah, excellent. Are they in the business?
No. And so again, the business wasn't something that we were entitled to. It's something that we definitely had to earn. Like our place in the business is something we definitely have to earn and to want.
Yeah.
So I didn't join the business straight out of uni. I worked for 5 years before joining, and I definitely joined it because I felt I wanted to, and I felt that was something that I could do in the business.
So there's no pressure from the family?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I think this allowed us the space to really find what mattered to us, what motivated us, and it didn't necessarily have to mean, following the same path that our parents did.
You had any kind of self-pressure in a way, saying, well, I need to kind of get involved in the business. Is there any feeling that sort of?
Actually, I was chatting to someone about this the other day. I think because I was a woman in the family, like I didn't actually internalize that pressure. Okay. Because it was definitely not something society expected of me. And so my early memories of the business were spending Saturday mornings with my dad. He used to go to office for 3 or 4 hours every Saturday morning. So I used to tag along. And, I used to watch him taste toothpaste and sniff soap and, smell perfume. And sort of that was my that was my initiation to the
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
And so and he used to go on, every time we used to travel, he used to stop in the market, speak to the retail customers, ask them how the products are doing.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was very much about, being exposed to the fun parts of the business, or the
Yeah.
parts of the business that really mattered.
Yeah.
And I think over time, I realized that was something that I would enjoy.
Yeah.
So it was definitely not out of pressure or obligation. I
Yeah.
definitely did it on my own terms, and I think gender had a part to play in
Yeah,
it.
I
strangely.
guess it's kind of you're integrated into the business, right? Because when your dad running that business and he was so passionate about what he was doing, and as a daughter going and seeing, like, I mean, we had the same thing. I mean, Dylan was born kind of when I started my business, right? So he only thing that he's seen me doing stuff.
Yeah.
So you get that influence and knowledge, I guess, customers, products.
Yeah.
So you kind of integrating into that business. Is that right
Yeah,
way to
and
see it?
I think just by osmosis, the business imprints on you, and you imprint on the business. And
Yeah.
I think I definitely, my path was never to join the family business. So I worked in public policy for 5 years before so I did a complete 180 in my trajectory before I joined the family business. And I think I found my way back because I wanted to, not because I had to. And I think that also carved out the space for me to really figure out what I wanted, the value I wanted to add to the business, as opposed to just kind of getting on the hamster wheel and keeping it turning,
Yeah. Yeah. So what were you doing before joining the business after leaving your uni or whatever you're doing studies? And did you work for someone else?
Yeah, like I was 100% sure I was going to save the world.
Okay.
Like 100% sure. And then I grew up. But I, at 18, I was very passionate about a ton of social causes, which I am still today, but I'm a little bit more pragmatic about.
Please take us through.
How to,
Yeah.
how to
Yeah,
achieve them. So I'm a lawyer by training. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't practice at all now.
Okay.
And I definitely think it's probably expired. But yeah, social justice issues was things that were really important to me. I think from a very young age, I hated seeing injustice. Like that just pissed me off. And especially injustice that was structural in nature. And so I think big part of why I did law was because I felt like I could intervene in that. And then I realized that the courtroom wasn't the best place to do that. So then I joined a think tank, and I called Verite Research, which operates in Sri Lanka. And I worked there for 5 years, where we kind of looked at public policy reform, we looked at regulation, and we looked at really how to strengthen the public policy framework so that everyone gets a shot. And then I remembered Sri Lanka went through a political transition at that time, and the space for really advocacy or change was quite limited. And so then I said, okay, I can also influence some of these issues that I care about by using the resources available to me, which is the company. And purpose and profit don't necessarily have to be diametrically opposed. And so I think that was the moment where I decided, okay, I was going to join the business. I was going to create value by doing things that I cared about. And it turns out that equation works even to generate value to shareholders. So, yeah.
And you mentioned something before about, you grew up in a fairly privileged environment. Did that bring any pressure to you to succeed? Not to enter the business, but to succeed? Because I'm in a similar position, right? Where I have had a very privileged upbringing, but then there's always something in the back of my mind. There's no pressure from my family, but there's something in the back of my mind, which is just I have to achieve more now. Did you have that?
Yes and no. So I think for me it was again because I went first, right? Because I'm the oldest child. I think you get to sort of.
You have a clean slate.
You have a clean slate. You get to draw the playground, and then you get to sort of stack the game up so you can win, in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
But I think the pressure really came from the fact that as a family we were always pushed to have a point of view, to sort of not take our upbringing for granted. And I think what the cushion of privilege gives you, if people take it, is the fact that you have the headspace and the freedom to think of something bigger than yourself. If you're constantly if you're worrying about where the next meal is going to come from or how are you going to take care of your family, you don't necessarily have the luxury to think about big picture impact, right? And I think that's really the responsibility of people that do have that privilege, because you have the license, you have the space. And so I think it's just the fact that I had the space and of course a family that prioritized impact beyond sort of the home.
Yeah. And so I know now you're managing director, if I'm correct. So take us through that journey from when you first joined the family business to now.
Yeah, it definitely was a series of of events that I had little to no control over. So I joined the business to do product development and innovation, which today, I mean, I still look back and I'm like, that's the most fun I had in the business. I was managing, I was in our pharmaceutical manufacturing business. I entered there. We have a business called Morrison. And I was managing its consumer health portfolio, which is, so it had like skin creams and things like that, that was not core to the business. No one cared about it. And so I was like in this little bubble where I was developing this product. No one in the business was invested in making it succeed. No one in the business cared if I failed or So I think as a result, I had the space to create, and also the space to do it without the fear of failure, because even if I failed, it wouldn't cost the business much. And then sort of subsequently, they realized that, okay, I was super passionate about consumer products, and being in a pharmaceutical manufacturing business didn't essentially enable me to do that. And so then I moved to this business, which is much more hardcore consumer product development. And so I kind of started a little cell called the business development team, where it was, where we spotted a bunch of white spaces in the market that we felt needed to be solved. And one of them was, we realized that Sri Lanka, 98% of our face care shelf was stacked with fairness creams. And so this is something that we felt, and as we were talking to women, particularly in their late 20s, this is not something that was, of course, there's something cultural with fair equals beautiful, and that's been created over generations. But there were also a group of women that wanted more, right? This is not all they wanted, but the market really wasn't solving for that. And so we thought, okay, this is a cool space that again marries the stuff that we cared about with, I think, business potential. And so we developed a whole range of products to address that particular needs that women wanted. And again, there, because we were starting from nothing, because we were creating new product, it was a ton of fun. And then subsequently, Sri Lanka, we launched it in the middle of COVID. So not, in hindsight, not the best time to launch a product and get consumer feedback. But, we did it. It wasn't ideal, but today it's sort of really firing. So I'm glad we took that chance. And then Sri Lanka went through an economic crisis. We had a change in leadership. So I suddenly sort of went from being sort of doing this, the best job of my life with zero consequence and zero responsibility to sort of being marketing director. So again, then I was managing the core brands. The responsibility grew. You couldn't just do fun stuff. You also had to balance the core business. And then in a matter of 6 months, we had a leadership change again. And then there were, I remember the board came and chatted to me. They were like, Sabrina, we can look for a managing director, but kind of you're around. I think you should take it. And I was like, absolutely not. Like I am not ready for this. I don't have the skills. I don't have the appetite. And Sri Lanka at that, so Sri Lanka at that time was sort of in the throes of its economic or just about to tip over. So I the dates are fuzzy because everything sort of fused. But I remember I took over in April 22. Sri Lanka basically broke in May 22.
Wow.
And
What a timing.
What a welcome gift.
So I was like, oh God, is it too late to backtrack? But I remember, in hindsight, obviously I could laugh about it, but I think, my learning curve and the business's learning curve and the country's learning curve were all sort of fusing together. And I think the good thing in that moment is that experience didn't count for anything, because no one had seen
never seen
anything like it. So all that mattered is you had the right values, you had the right intention, and perhaps you had sort of the, you weren't colored by the past. And so I think that really helped me jump into the deep end. And I was like, look, I can't think. Like, it's just not an option. So
do you think that putting you under pressure, like, putting you under that deep end, that was an opportunity for you to learn fast?
It was, but it could have also gone really badly. So, in hindsight, obviously, like, I'm proud of the fact that like I survived it, and I think it definitely has made me more resilient, and I think it helped sort of really increase my credibility with my team, because I think if I did it in a stable year when things were well, I would have always been my dad's daughter, right? And so the fact that they had to trust me to take them through this time, and we got through the time, I think really helped my credibility, my resilience as a leader. But I think if I didn't have the OPM, so I started the OPM
good timing.
3 months after this, right? And I think if I didn't have OPM, I don't think I would have made it.
You think that OPM gave you the confidence to?
It gave me the confidence. I think it took me, because Sri Lanka over the last 3 years has been incredibly challenged. And I think running a business in Sri Lanka without, that global exposure, without having that ritual of going out, speaking to other people and coming back into the market, if I didn't have that, I think my world would have got really narrow. And my ability to see beyond the curve would have just completely shrunk. Right?
I mean, the great thing about OPM, right? What I realized, I mean, if our viewers don't know OPM, so this is the course that we did together at Harvard Business School. Given, like, we really realize, doesn't matter what position you're doing, which country you are in, what size of business you are in or doing, we all have similar kind of problems, like in a different ways. Like it's unbelievable, because when we're doing our circles or when we having a discussion with our cohort, everyone's going through the same kind of challenges, right? Like, it's just so good to know that I'm not the only one. Right? You probably had the similar experience.
And I think you feel so supported in that. And I think it's super important as a leader to surround yourself in spaces where you can be vulnerable. And I think particularly when operating in leadership positions in emerging markets, where in an ideal world for me, I would love to be as vulnerable as I feel. But that definitely will retract in terms of how I'm perceived as a leader. And of course, we're trying to change that, but it can't happen overnight. And I think just to be able to let your guard down, to be able to let sort of, your deep insecurities out, to be your authentic self. I think that was so important, because, I spent 3 years pretending like I've got things under control when like 50% of the time, like I'm faking it. So I think, that was really nice.
Absolutely.
And you talked about there was like a lot of turmoil there in Sri Lanka when you were leading during that period. How do you, as a leader, lead a team through that kind of tumultuous period when it looks like the ship is sinking?
I think you don't have the luxury to lead and to think. So I think it's literally about rolling your sleeves up, being super transparent with your team, saying, look, no one has seen anything like this. I definitely don't have all of the answers. But this is kind of what I believe about the business and why I believe it needs to it needs to still be here, in the next 10 years, and really
the vulnerability that you're
Yeah,
talking about,
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that really opened up, right? Like,
Yeah.
and because sometimes vulnerability, people think it's a weakness, especially country like, I don't really want to discriminate, like, but I had the feedback from my business partners here, because I kind of open up very, like, I mean, my way of doing things, I don't have anything hidden, right? Black and white. But many times I say, hey, this is Sri Lanka. You shouldn't be doing that. You should, because vulnerability can seen as a weakness. What's your thoughts? Do you see that or not really?
I don't agree with it,
Yeah.
but I think that it definitely exists, and this is why I've had to calibrate, right? So I
Yeah.
think in certain groups, in certain groups or in certain teams, I think leaders should be able to let their guard down, particularly say with their top teams, they should be able to let their guard down and tell people, look, this is where I'm at, this is what I feel, and let's figure this out together. But I think there are certain parts of the organization, at least in our organization, if I take the factory floor or the field office, if I sort of give out this impression that I'm figuring things out, or I'm kind of uncertain about the future, what happens is they immediately connect it to their livelihood.
Absolutely.
And so, while I'm just concerned about the business and how we're going to, navigate the business, they're going to panic more because they're like, can I feed my family? And I think putting that stress onto them is probably counterproductive for them and counterproductive for the business. So I think in certain groups of the organization, leaders should feel free to shed the mask. But I think in certain groups, it's super important to give them the impression that you have it under control, because,
I totally agree with. I had the same discussion. Dylan was there today as well, because we are going through some changes, and sometimes your team changes are sometimes people thinking of themselves, like how that's going to impact, and so how do you manage that, like that kind of a situation? Like we had the similar discussion this afternoon with my team, so I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, that's good.
And I imagine there must have been like so much you had to learn in such a short period. Were there any mentors that you had to kind of help guide you through this transition?
Yeah, no. Of course, my dad was a big source of strength and mentorship, because he knew the business. So when things got tough or it was reaching a point where I couldn't sort of think through the next steps, he really supported me through that. And there was also a board member that I've been that's mentoring me from the time I got into the business, who, again, he's like the wisest man I know, super calm, who helped put things into perspective. And I think reassure me that I wouldn't be in this situation if people felt that I wasn't capable. And I think it's really important to be reminded of that, especially when things seem so out of control. And I think what they both did was, I think they asked me the important questions at regular intervals, because I think when a leader is under crisis and a leader feels under assault by her own lack of capability or the market, I think what ends up happening is you get quite operational. You just wake up every morning and you do stuff.
Reactive.
Because doing stuff makes you feel like you've got it under control. But doing stuff won't necessarily make you an effective leader. And I think having mentors that kept asking me, okay, in the next year from now, what is it that you're trying to build? If you look at, so I think having mentors that help you see around the corner or force you to get out of the day-to-day and sort of rise above, I think is super important, especially when you're in the business that has the temptation to bring you back into the fires.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how to ask this question, but I know in Sri Lanka here, it's very traditional in the sense of gender roles. And so I want to know, did you have any like issues or struggles being like a prominent woman leader in such a large organization?
I think my last name helps. So I definitely have the privilege of, not having to break through the glass ceilings the same way like a professional woman would have. So I'm definitely cognizant of that. But the company also has been extremely merit-based and extremely progressive, like even before I was around. And so I think the environment itself was something that doesn't eject or reject a woman's leadership. For example, we hired the first female CEO of a publicly listed conglomerate a couple years, no, 4 years ago. And so I think that was, she definitely broke through the glass ceiling but she's an outcome, I think, of the culture that we've created. So I think I was fortunate on two fronts. One, that the business in itself is receptive and open to a woman, and then secondly, that I come from the family of owners. So even if people had concerns about my leadership, they were definitely not telling me to my face. So.
And you mentioned something there, culture, which we were talking about before we started this conversation. Like how many employees are there in the Hemas business? Roughly?
About 4,000.
Right, so it's a huge business
huge.
to put in to perspective for people. How do you go about building a culture where people like want to come to work and deliver excellent results every single day?
Yeah, I think it's super important to inspire people with a vision that is bigger than themselves. And particularly the businesses that we're in consumer and healthcare. And a big part of why my grandfather started the business was to increase the quality of lives of Sri Lankans. And sort of in the businesses that we're in, we've consistently done this. Whether it's the healthcare businesses that we operate and the consumer brands business, we really try to identify local needs and put out products that are accessible to the masses and take on the big guys doing that. So I think that really gives that breathes life into a business if people know that that value is being created, particularly for their home country, that it's a homegrown business that is doing that. I think there's both a sense of pride and meaning, and I think being intentional about leveraging that to increase your competitive advantage is something that we're trying to get much more intentional about.
And is that difficult to do here? Because as you mentioned before, as soon as you maybe show a little bit of weakness, people are thinking about themselves first. Are they going to be able to put food on the table? So is it difficult to inspire people to think beyond themselves?
No, absolutely not. But I think your leadership style and how you motivate people has to be different in different situations with different teams, and that's what we realized. So for example, with the group of people in your organization that are creating value, like at the forefront of creating value, it's super important to give them the canvas, tell them why they're doing it, and leave them alone. For those that need a bit more direction in terms of, like, say again, field and factory floor workers, for them you need to kind of tell them, look, this is the objective that I want. This is the skills that I'm going to sort of invest in building in you, and I want you to try within that slightly smaller canvas. I want you to try a bunch of things and then I need, so what we do is we try to encourage micro innovations on process, innovations on trade schemes, and then we get people to share. And so it's about the degree of space, and the degree of space correlates with someone's education, someone's capability. And so our job as a business is to calibrate the canvas to and enhance capabilities so that we can, at every level people are innovating, right? Whether it be big or small.
So talking about space, do you get that space from your family? Because your father pretty much ran the business and he handed over that to you and your other family members. So do you have that space? Like you can do whatever you think that it's good for the business?
Absolutely. And I think I wouldn't be here today if I was being micromanaged. And that was super important to me, to have the freedom to make my own mistakes and to operate in the way that I wanted to. But I think he's the chairman of my board.
Okay.
And I always laugh because every time I have a new idea, he goes, but but do you really think that will work? So it's not, it's not so much as don't do it.
It's the
but it's
devil
more
on
that
the shoulder.
intense, basically glass half empty attitude to questions. But I think that has really sharpened my resolve.
Yeah.
Or at least, pride gets in the way and I absolutely can't afford to fail.
Maybe he's doing it intentionally for you to think harder, right? Yeah. So,
And we talked about Harvard. I know me and Jam had a few conversations about the key takeaways from this. But for you, are there any key takeaways from this 3-year-long program that you are going to implement going forward?
Yeah, we just spoke about it. So maybe it's recency bias, but maybe it is actually the biggest takeaway. But it's, who will miss you when you're gone. And I think for us, because we are a homegrown company, a big part of our competitive advantage is making sure that we build brands that actually solve for Sri Lankan needs. And increasingly what's happening is as Sri Lanka becomes less and less influential on a global stage, less and less companies or global companies are actively solving for Sri Lankan needs, where in fact being actively ignored in everyone's value chain. And so I think that's really something that really stuck with me, because if we're not here today, it potentially means that the healthcare needs and the consumption needs of Sri Lankans get significantly worse off. And so my job really is about how do you build an organization that really leans into that? How do you build teams that are motivated by that? We were chatting. My job is to take this aha moment that I had, and to figure out how I'm going to translate it into the organizations.
That's exactly. All of us have the same challenge, I guess. We change, we transform ourselves, but how can we transform the rest? So that's the thing. So Sabrina, I wanted to ask this question from you. Again, I want to make sure this is politically correct question. So Sri Lanka produced the first female prime minister in the world, and I believe first female president as well. I'm not sure about that. And now we have another female prime minister in Sri Lanka right now. So how do you find as a female leader, a business leader? Do you think the gender, is that a challenge or that's an advantage, or do you think like how that plays? Because I'm not really sure about different cultures have different way. People see you as a leader, like your gender is not gonna play any disadvantage or advantage for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think Sri Lanka's sort of heritage of having the first female prime minister and female president is often this accolade that we keep brandishing about. But if you look at women in politics today, I think there are under 10 women in parliament, right?
Yeah.
So while I'm really proud that we can earn those records, it definitely hasn't translated into structural outcomes for women in politics, and not just women in politics. I think women in leadership positions in the private sector as well. So I think the responsibility for women that rise to the top, whether it be, if you look at the two examples that you mentioned, Chandrika and Sirimavo, they were products of their husbands and their fathers, right? So I think a large portion of women that do end up in leadership positions are a factor of familial connections. And I think for those of us that rise to the top, supported by familial connections, I think our duty is to figure out how to create space for more women to get into leadership positions, whether that's changing how we operate as companies, changing our policies. So that's a big part of culture for me. How do you actually create a culture that includes includes the needs of large segments of the population that would have been ignored when organizations and policies were being formed. So I think that's one one super important duty. And the secondly is, I think, also translating into a business opportunity, which we're exploring, is often you have choices for women essentially coming out of those same paternalistic, patriarchal lenses, right? And I think if you actively look for needs that are emerging from women, like real needs, not needs that you think they need, I think there's a ton of business opportunities that can sort of come loose, given that more women are exercising choices for themselves. More women are going to work. One example is we have a feminine hygiene business, so sanitary napkins. And if you look at the sanitary napkin advertisements, say, of 10 years ago, it was about, woman gets her period, she goes immediately to her exercise class. She looks like she's really enjoying life. She goes for a jog, feeds her kids, and that's not at all depictive of like what the time of the month is like. So I think for the first time and of course, when they even showed the pads, they showed a blue liquid falling on the sanitary napkin. So I think all of it was just totally not representative of reality. So what we started to do is we've actually started to change the conversation in terms of depicting what it's actually like, going into schools and educating or telling women or girls that this is completely natural, calling out boys that tease girls when they have their periods. So I think and after we've done that, we've seen a huge increase in our market share, like an 8% gain in our market share. We've seen, more us be able to attract more new women into this category than ever before. So what I'm trying to say is, this stuff isn't just feel good, touchy-feely, good for the planet stuff. Like, if people are intentional about it, intentional about solving for women, intentional about helping women succeed, it can actually translate into some pretty awesome business results.
And people appreciate those things. Yeah.
And, you're already an incredibly large business. How do you stop yourself from just becoming like a stagnant incumbent? Because as you said, a lot of people are pulling away and there's like less competition on a world stage. How do you stop yourself from just stagnating?
Some days I'm better at that than others. But on the days that I'm better at that, it's about like getting up in the morning and reframing whatever's happening right now as an opportunity. And figuring out, amidst these challenges, if you look at opportunities to really build relevant brands when everyone else is pulling out, that could really increase your market position. It requires a commitment every day to figure out like, what are you building? Are you building something of value? And will it matter to someone and in the long term? And so I think that's something that I try to tell myself every day. And then secondly, what it's also done is it's also pushed me to think outside my comfort zone and think about what it means to build a regional business, so that the business doesn't become a function of its geography. And maybe this is the thing that we have to do for the next generation. And so I think really figuring out, not having the luxury, I guess, with such a large business with capital resources to put to work, you have the luxury to think about how not just how you reframe this as an opportunity, but how you pursue some of those opportunities and how you change the future of your trajectory. And I think that's something that I try to get better at every day. But of course, there are those days when you just have to put out the fires.
Yeah. And like going forward, what's next?
For me, it's about how to figure out how to translate what we've created here and built here and take it to other markets. Particularly, we have a business in Bangladesh. We're exploring a business in East Africa. So I think that's going to be my next challenge, because Sri Lanka is comfortable because I know this consumer inside out. The business has a reputation. I have the networks. I have a distribution network where I put products into it, and it goes around the island. So having none of that comfort and trying to build basically a new business from scratch and try to rediscover entrepreneurship is going to be, I think, my biggest challenge. But I'm pretty excited. Again, nothing to lose.
That's it. So Sabrina, outside business, apart from, we talked about a lot about business, right? But this is not just about business. So tell us a bit about you. What Sabrina do after work, or what's your life
Oh
like?
God, Jam! Don't ask me questions that I definitely don't have interesting answers to. But I think you asked me the two takeaways. I think the one big takeaway from the Harvard program was who will miss you if you're gone in terms of the business.
Yeah.
But the second big takeaway was this idea that are you happy with the legacy that you're on, or the legacy track that you're on? And for me that was really a moment to stop and think whether the balance sheet that I have of my friends and my family and my life outside work is really something that I can feel proud of. And to be honest, the answer is no. Work has been over the last 3 years a predominant feature. So for me, a big improvement area, something that I want to work on, is how does life happen while work happens too. And I think this is my commitment to myself. While I will of course pursue excellence at work, I will also pursue excellence at life. The one thing I think that I do for myself every day is, so my workout schedules are sacred for me. So I work out 6 to 7 every morning. I think that helps, centers me. I definitely feel good when doing it. And so that's about the only thing I can say with conviction I do for life. Everything else, I think it's I definitely have to get better at it, as my husband keeps reminding me.
And you mentioned there that you're trying to improve your work-life balance. How are you going to go about doing that?
I think just prioritizing life. Because I think every morning you get up and you prioritize work. But a couple of things. One is I want to travel more to see now I have friends all over the world.
Of course,
so, every quarter figuring out who I'm going to see. I think that's going to be important, and that'll take me out. And secondly, just making sure that every week that I'm doing something, with my friends or my family, that's intentional. So
Remember, we learn to focus on first yourself, second family, and third business. In that order.
Oh God. I think that sounds great in theory. I wish I could do it in practice.
I know. You can do that. I think I believe that.
Jam, you're a role model for me. You just told me you haven't checked in since the 18th of September.
That's right. So I have an amazing team. You have an amazing team, but again, trusting them, right? Them to run the business when you're away. It's a hard thing. It's take a lot of guts, a lot of time to learn. But then, we are in a different level of size of business as well. But which is it's a great thing. I'm sure if you focus on that, you can achieve that. It's not too difficult.
In the spirit of being vulnerable, that's definitely something that I would like to work on.
Definitely. And you have to visit Australia at some point as well. You never
Absolutely.
been to Australia.
I know. Absolutely. I have a reason.
And if you had 30 seconds with little Sabrina, what would you say to her?
Don't. What would I say to her? You're not going to save the world, but keep trying.
Interesting. Interesting. And why?
And why? Because I think my idealism. When I remember when I was younger, I was 100% sure that I was going to make a positive impact. And I think there was a series of events where I joined public policy. I did that. So, and then when things didn't work out, the level of frustrations increased. So I think it's having the willingness to keep trying. Yeah.
And do you have any regrets?
I typically, no. I like to. For me, regret is not an emotion that I've experienced. I like to just leave it all on the mat.
Sabrina, you are changing the world. Everything that you do. I remember when I left Sri Lanka, that was 35 years ago, women hygiene, right? Like that was never heard. Like my mom would never use those kind of sanitary, or what do you call it? Those things, right? And now the world has changed. I mean, Sri Lanka has changed, right? Like, so, I mean, you guys are leading that change. So you are changing the world.
Yeah, thank you, Jam.
So you should be proud of what you're doing and everything. Yeah, I mean, children, like amazing things what you're doing in consumer space. That's
Thank you.
That's a great change. Yeah.
And looking back on your journey, do you feel successful?
I feel a lot more self-assured. And so I feel much more confident in my abilities. And yeah, I think that makes me feel successful. Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you do, because I would definitely call you successful. And throughout our conversation, I've been jotting down a few things. And I think these are like the characteristics which I think have led to your successful life. I think the first one is you're very family oriented. And I think family is such an important thing. And I think having that early, like, strong family bond has really, like, built you up. And I think having that close connection is something that's really special. And, not everyone gets to have, but it sounds like you and your family have that. And I think that's been maybe the support that's definitely helped you. And I think the other one is you're a very big picture thinker. Throughout the whole conversation, it's always been about, like, you always almost deflected the questions to how can the impact be towards others? How can we build products that change other people's lives? How can, when we're dealing with business, how can I support my team? And so I think having that kind of humility to step back and the humbleness to put other people forward, I think is definitely one of the core traits, which is allowing you to kind of move forward. And, like, as part of that, I think empowering your team was another big one, which I took from the conversation. It was, even though you're in, a high level of leadership, it's all about you're realizing now that your job is to empower your team and give them the ability to go on and create bigger and better things. And the last one, which we heard a lot of, was almost like, I don't know how to put it, but like, know your customer. You said it so many times, but you were like, you're building products for someone.
Yeah.
And I think that's so critical, because so many businesses out there just go and build a product which they think is good and go out there and look for a customer to sell it to.
Yeah.
But, like, this conversation is so crucial. Like, the takeaway for me is go to the people first.
Yeah.
Look at what their problem is and then build a solution for them. Yeah. And I think that's, for me, is a really big takeaway. So I'm really glad we got to sit down and have this conversation.
I always tell my team, such a humbling experience to make this product that you love and then test it with your customers. Because sometimes they absolutely rip it to shreds. But I think it's super important to have the willingness to listen and learn. So.
Yeah, just to add to that list, knowing Sabrina for last 2 years and how I find you, Sabrina, you're quite authentic. Like, from the very first day that I met you, we just found, like, we both from Sri Lanka background, like, and such an easy person to get along with, and easy to have a conversation. And I spent some time with you in Sri Lanka as well, talking about our assignments and things like that. But I feel like, someone that I know for a long time, more than 2 years, so that feeling comes from that, your authenticity, very easy to get along. And so, thank you so much for spending hour with us. I don't know, you believe it or not, we spent 1 hour.
God, it's
almost
flown.
Talking, and I know you're a very busy person, and allowing Dylan and I to come and have a chat with you, and it's
very, very greatly appreciated.
And hopefully we share this with our audience, and they will learn quite a few.
Thank you so much.
And for those listening, if you could do us a massive favor and follow us at the Quest for Success Pod, and also check us out on YouTube, the Quest for Success Podcast, and subscribe to us over there. And you can see all of our episodes on our website, thequestforsuccesspodcast.com. And with that, we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.